There is nothing that we have discovered since oil or invented since oil, beyond nuclear power, that could do anything similar. The material world that you exist in is a creature of fossil fuel.
Since 2000, the U.S. percentage of CO2 emissions have gone from 24% to 13%. China plus India have gone from 13% to 40%. And look at you Australians down there. Aren't you cute? You're proud of your 1.1%, aren't you? You're just gonna change the world. What is wrong with your political class? Are they completely scientifically illiterate and innumerate?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Scott Hargraves, Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs. Welcome to this wonderful event on the biggest issue facing Australia at the moment, which is net zero. It is a huge issue for our economy, for consumers, for the working poor who are having to decide whether to heat or eat. It's a geopolitical issue, and that's why we believe it's time to pull the plug on net zero. To share their research and help us make that case tonight, we're joined by three terrific speakers. Adam Creighton, who's a Senior Fellow and Chief Economist at the IPA as of 4 months ago, and we're so pleased to have Robert with us. We have Chris Uhlmann, who, as you know, is a journalist of the top rank, who was with the ABC, we'll forgive him that, and then Nine, and is now with Sky TV. And if you haven't seen his wonderful documentary series that he produced with Sky TV called The Real Cost of Net Zero, then I urge you to go to YouTube and be an ad to the 1.2 million views it's already had. It's a fantastic video. And then he'll be introduced properly in a moment by Chris, but we have our main speaker who's come all the way from Texas via Perth, Brisbane and Melbourne with the IPA, and I speak, of course, of Robert Bryce. Robert, welcome to Sydney on behalf of the IPA. And what I would like to say to everyone here and to everyone watching is that the IPA can host this event and we can challenge net zero, which has been sadly bipartisan policy in this country for quite a few years now. We can do it because we're proudly independent. We neither seek nor receive funding from government. We are supported by nearly 10,000 members like you right across Australia. Go to ipa.org.au right now and join up if you haven't already. So without any further ado, I shall call upon Adam Creighton. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Scott. And look, it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces here. Thank you very much for your support and for engaging in what is, of course, a very important topic. And I must say it's a great privilege to speak in front of Mr. Howard. Thank you so much for coming. Look, I want to before I do introduce Chris Uhlmann in a bit, I just wanted to lay out some basic facts of where we are with net zero and the Australian economy in general. And it's a pretty gloomy time right now if you read the newspapers. So the Financial Review or the Australian, the economic statistics, they aren't great. And I want to cast your mind back. If we were meeting, say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it would have been a very different situation. Remember the phrase, the miracle economy? You'd always see that in the newspaper, or the 2-speed economy, the 3-speed economy. Those were the halcyon days. It was actually also when Mr. Howard was Prime Minister, actually, largely. We had low inflation, we had strong growth, we had strong per capita growth. We were the miracle economy in many senses. We had the resource boom. The biggest problem was the high Australian dollar, and I think that would be a nice problem to have again, especially when you're when you're overseas on holidays. But now, kind of fast forward to now, it's not a 2-speed economy; it's 1 speed, and it's actually reverse. We're not going ahead at all. Of the past 11 quarters, 9 of them have been negative in terms of per capita growth, which is extremely depressing. You've no doubt read that we've had the sharpest fall in living standards in the OECD since 2022, measured by various ways. We have extraordinarily high debt, partly due to our, what I would say was a rather crazy response to COVID, particularly bad in Victoria, where, this is a state, our second biggest, our second most important state. It had $23 billion of debt in 2019, and now it has $150 billion just a few years later, right? That's how badly some of our governments have run this country. Of course, migration is out of control, as you all know as well. So we have lots to complain about. Now, look, there are lots of bad policies to choose from. I mean, we can't blame the political class for everything bad that goes wrong in Australia. There are other forces obviously at play, but certainly they can do a lot of damage. And I would argue at the moment, we would argue with the IPA, that the net zero policy is certainly the most damaging, certainly the most insidious economic policy that we have in Australia. And it's certainly contributed to that huge decline that I just outlined earlier. It is basically an economic poison that we're continuing to drink, and we're largely ignoring, except for the IPA and increasingly some good journalists, it's still largely ignored in the mainstream media, how damaging it is. There's so much talk about the so-called Trump tariffs, the 10% tariff that's been imposed on Australia, or may not be imposed, actually. That'll be up to the Supreme Court. But that is a very small cost compared to the cost of net zero. I mean, there have been numerous studies that have shown that actually to achieve this, and of course, it is largely unachievable. We know that, and certainly Robert Bryce will make that clear. But the cost will be in the trillions. $9 trillion, that is the estimate. $9 trillion by 2050. That is the estimate by an organisation called Net Zero Australia, which is actually in favour of the transition. So that is the cost estimated by them, the total cost, the total investment cost. And this policy has led to all sorts of crazy situations. You know the huge increase in household electricity bills. But of course, it's not just the power bills. It flows through to the entire economy, all the costs of food, of transport, and so forth. So it's extremely insidious. We're in a situation where countries that use our coal and gas, they have cheaper power than we do, and yet it's all got to get there, and it's still cheaper, right? So it really is complete madness here. I mean, the long-term impact is that we have the smallest manufacturing sector in the OECD now. That is 32 nations, 32 rich nations, and as a share of GDP, we have now the smallest. And I think 10 years ago it was the fourth or fifth smallest, so there's been a considerable decline. And the world is an increasingly scary place, and I think we need to have a manufacturing sector of some sort. You never know what contingencies might arise, and we are basically killing ours. So the other point I wanted to make was just an example of the madness. I mentioned Victoria before, but because we have this obsession that it's okay to export our coal and our gas, it's fine for other countries to use it, but we won't do it ourselves. We are now currently in the most absurd situation where there's being LNG facility is being built in Melbourne to import gas from Western Australia and from Qatar. Even though just a couple of 100 kilometres away, there's a huge amount of gas just near Melbourne. But the constitution that the Labor government there has set up means that it can't be developed. So, I mean, how crazy is that, really? I mean, it's just extraordinary stuff. I think it's worth also pointing out that even if you think that human-induced climate change is a serious problem, even if you think all that, and even if you think that Australia can play a big part, which of course is somewhat amusing, given we are only 1.1% of global emissions, we have this target, as I'm sure you're aware of, that we're going to reduce our emissions by 43% by 2030. And you may have read, certainly Chris Bowen often likes to say, that we're 28% there already. So we're 28% lower than 2005 levels. Well, actually, it's only fallen 2.8%. That's actually been the decline since 2005, and that's because all the rest of the decline is this creative accounting with land use and trees. So basically the point is, we've barely reduced our emissions at all, and that is because of the core fact that Robert will get to, is that we cannot get away from fossil fuels. They are extremely important, and you cannot phase them out. You can have these little toy solar panels and wind things here and there, and they're very expensive, but fundamentally, even in jurisdictions like South Australia, they'll say, 70%, we're powered by wind and solar, but they still have an interconnector to Victoria, and if that was ever chopped, if that was ever cut, they'd have blackouts all the time, constantly. So before I get to introduce Chris, I do want to end on a slightly optimistic note. My personal view is that I think we've turned the corner on net zero. There's still a lot of nonsense out there. We still have the policy, but I think more and more people are starting to realise it's just so crazy. So you can look at the UK Conservative Party. They have now dumped it as a policy. The South Australian Liberals, the New South Wales Nationals have also dumped it. The Queensland Government is starting to cancel various renewable projects. The former Labor Prime Minister of the UK, Tony Blair, he's come out himself, which I thought was very brave of him actually, given his background, and said that this does not make sense. It's being driven by fundamentalists. And actually in the past week, if you followed the British press, even British Labor politicians now are starting to raise questions about the wisdom of their own government's policy. We've seen the Spanish blackout, so I think you're seeing, people around the world are seeing what can happen in the future. You can have these very long blackouts, very dangerous blackouts. And I just wanted to just show you one chart from my research. Oh, it's apparently up there. So I looked through the budget papers over the past 10 years looking for key words: emissions, climate change, renewable energy, etc., etc. And you can see that there was a flurry of interest in the budget papers during the Rudd-Gillard years, and then it fell away to almost nothing during the coalition government. And then, of course, you had the election of the Albanese government, and suddenly, numerous mentions, 90 mentions, I think, in one budget paper of being a renewable energy superpower or some nonsense like that. It was really quite embarrassing. But the key point from this is, in the most recent budget, they'd all basically collapsed. So I think that even the Labor Party is starting to realise that this is not as popular as it was, and they don't want to be so wedded to it. So look, with that, I'm now going to move on to introducing Chris, which is a great privilege of mine. I mean, he of course precedes himself as one of Australia's most distinguished and experienced journalists across all forms, across print, across radio, across TV. He's been in the business for 35 years, but I think he came to journalism kind of late. I think in his late 20s. Actually, a bit like me, I didn't become a journalist till I was 32, but and I think he had time in the seminary earlier and as a security guard, so very, very varied life experience. And I think that's actually, that's massively informed his worldview and his journalism. I think that's why he's such a good journalist. Of course, he's now at the Australian after long stints at Channel 9 and the ABC in various roles. He's written a trilogy, I believe, of political thrillers set in Canberra. He won a Walkley Award, of course that's the highest gong in journalism, in 2008 for broadcast journalism. And I particularly want to call out that he was one of the COVID heroes back in 2020, who was one of the very, very small group of journalists, myself included, I must say, who was a strong critic of the lockdowns and the mask mandates and the vaccine mandates and all that sort of stuff. And we feel that we've been very vindicated. so yes. So thank you, Chris. But more recently, he has turned his attention to energy, and he's done such a brilliant job of it. He's produced a documentary for an hour which lays out all the problems with net zero, and I'm sure that he's going to talk about some of that tonight. So with that, Chris, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, the IPA, and thank you all for being here this evening. Well, humans are creatures of fire. In fact, it's so buried in our history as to how we began to capture and manipulate this in order to control in some way our environment and at least keep at bay our climate, that it's lost in mystery, in legend, and things like Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and was punished forever after by Zeus by bringing this miracle into the hands of mortality. And of course, there's no reason why we as Homo sapiens should have any memory of fire, because we did not invent it or the control of it. We inherited it. It was some earlier hominoid lost in the mists of time who actually understood how to capture fire. And I quite often wonder, what was the journey of that? Of course, you would have been driven by the bushfires. You would have seen the heat and the light, but it would have terrified you. I wonder if it was the smell, and not the smell of the fire, the smell of the animals that did not escape the fire, the smell of cooked meat, which drew us and other scavengers to the fire, first on the wing, and then as the ground cooled on 4 feet and on 2. And we tasted for the first time cooked meat, which tasted like nothing we had ever tasted before or smelt before. It was easier to eat, it was easier on our teeth. And I can imagine the tribe gathering together a burnt log or a burning log to take back as the first ever campfire. And for the first time, as they fed it, to have light at night that did not come from the moon or the stars, and to have heat that did not come from the sun. Imagine that. Imagine how you would treasure that until the climate put it out. It rained. And in that cold, dark, wet night, you dreamed of being able to keep that flame alive forever, to find a way to capture it and keep it and manipulate it for yourself. And maybe it was by accident that when making a tool with a piece of flint, a spark caught the grass. And then imagine that moment when you realised, we can make this. We can make this and we can keep it, and we can keep it at night time, and we can keep it through the cold winters as long as we keep feeding it. And with that great gift, humanity began to move. Again, not first Homo sapiens. It was Neanderthal that went first, but then we came after them. We rise north, carrying our fire into colder climates. The only way we could get there, we outcompete the other hominoids, and we are the last one, and we continue our journey north. We make it all the way to the Arctic Circle, and we leave some of our own behind, and they could survive there. Why? Because they had fire to keep the climate at bay. Then we move across into the Americas and all the way down to the tip of South America. And at the same time, there's another journey that's taking place, an older journey, through India, through what we now call Indonesia, and almost to what we call Australia now. There are people who argue the toss over this, but there is a school of thought that they got to Timor and they hit the sea. But they knew that over the horizon there must be land. Why? Because they could see the smoke when that land burned. And eventually, they might have sailed that sea. That is perhaps the way that they got here, and over time forgot how they got here and forgot how to sail. But when they got to Australia, this is a landscape now manipulated by fire. Everything we see around us over the last 60,000 years, the way our trees germinate, is a product of the fire that was brought by the Aboriginal people to Australia. If you cast the line back through human GDP along the x-axis, for as far as we can imagine, or economists can imagine, it pretty much doesn't lift off the x-axis. While we're using wood and animal and human labour, we're using muscle power to drive the world's economy. It does not budge much. But then we find something else, something that is more powerful than wood, a denser fuel source than wood, and it burns hotter. It's coal. And with coal, we boil water and we turn the great wheels of industry. So those wheels begin to spin, and they spin not just stationary making things, they spin in machines that drive us across the landscape and drive us across the sea in steam trains and in steam-powered boats. This is the era of coal, and the world begins to change radically and forever. Now, my grandfather, Alan Frederick McLean Uhlmann, was born in 1899 in a house near Brisbane in the era of coal. His grandfather, in fact, Friedrich, had come across the ocean from Germany in the 1850s, driven by wind, of course. That was the only way that he could have got here, that we needed the weather in those days to power our machines. But 1899, when my grandfather's born, he's born into a house that has no running water. It has no electricity. It has none of the mod cons that we've come to expect today. There are no planes in the air and there are no cars in the streets. It's horse and cart. And it's always good to remember that the way that we measure power is horse power. It is the only thing that we could measure it against, but we've now moved from the era of mankind's muscle and horse muscle into machine muscle. But in the course of his lifetime, he goes from that house without power. He dies in 1967, and we are 2 years shy of the moonshot. My grandfather could have met the Wright brothers and Neil Armstrong in a single lifetime. How did that happen? Well, of course, there was coal, but then we discover this other incredibly dense form of energy that is light, is portable, and is like nothing we have ever seen before. It is oil. With 1 litre of diesel, you can drive a 40-tonne truck 1 kilometre. There is nothing that we have discovered since oil or invented since oil, beyond nuclear power, that could do anything similar. All the sources of energy that we are talking about now are worse than the ones that we are using. And here's the kicker. We spent all this time and all this energy on all this kit, and it's not just, by the way, the stuff that we can see when we switch on the lights. It's all the materials around you. The material world that you exist in is a creature of fossil fuel. So it makes the cement, it makes the steel, it makes the plastics, it makes the ammonia, which feeds half the world's population, because during the First World War, the same guy that invents the gas that's used on the Somme works out a way to clutch nitrogen from the atmosphere and to feed plants with it. Half of the world's population would not be alive today if it wasn't for that discovery. These are the things that we did with fossil fuel. Your entire universe is built around it, and it was entirely about making a small part of the population comfortable. To be free of the mercurial nature of the climate and the weather. But now we've decided that we're going to make our energy system weather dependent. We are going to use wind again and solar power again to power this world. It isn't happening, and I'll leave to explain why it isn't happening to our next speaker, Robert Bryce, because he is the man that we want to hear from about energy. He is one of the clarion voices, not just here, but around the world, that helps make this complicated area much more simple, digests it as if we were cooking food so that we can consume it in a way that we can understand it, and that is a tremendous gift. But Robert, I have to tell you before I hand over the gift that we are giving you this evening. We live in New South Wales. Tonight there is a football game on in Perth. This football game is a code called rugby league, which you would understand because it's not that different from gridiron. So if you want to think about what the state of origin is, a game between New South Wales and Queensland, think the Civil War, where anything but lethal force is okay. It is a great sporting event. And the only thing I can think about the timing of your speaking tonight is it's clearly been organised by Victorians. Now, I'm sure because you've been in their clutches for a week, that they would have told you that you have to go and see an Australian rules football game because this is the greatest code on earth. They're lying to you. The truth is, it has spread around Australia. It is more popular than rugby league and rugby union, which our esteemed former Prime Minister John Howard knows a lot about, certainly, and a rugby league man as well. But rugby league we call the greatest game of it all, mainly because it is. Australian rules football basically can only be understood by inhabitants of Victoria, South Australia and Western Australia. So you should be pleased to see this number of people in this crowd tonight because they believe that your presence is more important than state of origin. So, without further ado, can I invite you to join us?
I've never had an introduction like that one. As Chris was going on, I thought of this line I heard. It was actually a British military guy who, after this long, flowery introduction, he got on the stage and he said, "I appreciate that introduction. It was one my father would have appreciated and my mother would have believed." It's a real thrill to be back here in Australia. This is my third trip with my wife, Lauren, and love Australia. Just a great place and a real treat to be back. And further, to be invited back by the IPA. I gave the Mackay lecture, I think, in 2014. So a real treat to be lecturing again on behalf of IPA. And further, to be invited back because this is the first time I've ever been invited back anywhere. Don't know why, but it took them 11 years, so maybe they forgot. On Saturday, my wife Lauren and I went bird watching, and while bird watching, I finally understood how different Australia is from the rest of the world. Now, we're avid bird watchers. We've been to Galapagos. We were birding in Chile in October and had a great day with our guide, Christian During. We went all over South Australia, near Melbourne, and saw a bunch of species. We saw the oyster catcher, the pied oyster catcher, hooded plovers, and we saw black swans. A black swan event in Australia means nothing. And it was after we came back and I thought, wait, now, okay, so Australia, let's think about this. So your swans are black. You drive on the wrong side of the road. Your winter is the summer. The water in the toilet goes the wrong way. Your footy players don't wear helmets. And your liberals are conservatives. Explain this to me. The Liberal Party. Wait, no, it's just one more time. They're the conservatives. Yes, they're the conservatives. Okay, yeah, I get it. Labor, I get it. All right. There's a lot to talk about. And so I'm going to get right to it here. And I'm going to hit you with a stat bomb tonight. So buckle your seatbelts. Pulling the plug. We need to embrace energy humanism, and I'm going to get right to it in 25 minutes and 30 slides or so. Here we go. 5 points. I won't read these to you. Here's the quick outline. There is no energy transition. And this is key because this entire fiction around net zero and the idea that you can achieve net zero is based on this concept, this propaganda is the right word, around this idea that an energy transition can be done cheaply and easily and at lower cost. All right, so let's get to it. Not my numbers, the numbers. Not my numbers, the numbers. Statistical review of world energy data. You could see the bottom two segments of the graph, China and India. CO2 emissions in the world's 6 largest economies since 2000. And look at the yellow line. That's Germany. God bless the Germans. They're going to waste $1 trillion on the energy Wende with this mistaken belief that they are going to change the trajectory of global CO2 emissions. Now, they are driving themselves into the ditch, and I'm pointing out Germany here because I see a similar dynamic at work here in Australia, unfortunately. Okay, so not my numbers, the numbers. Pay attention to this graphic, and then this one. The exact same set of numbers in this graphic as in the prior one. Same numbers in this slide as in this slide, but just in a horizontal bar chart. Note the US has reduced its emissions more than any other country in the world by far. 1.1 gigatons, 1,100 million tons. That's largely the result of gas displacing coal in the power sector. But then look at what has happened in China and India over that same time period. Now, the 2024 numbers are going to be out in a few days from the statistical review, but nevertheless, those numbers are going to be yet larger than what you see there. But you can see that since 2000, the increase in CO2 emissions, remember this is just the increase, is about 10 gigatons. So show me these numbers, or go through these numbers and show me, and go slowly because I'm from Oklahoma. Where is this energy transition? There's no energy transition in India and China. Their CO2 emissions are skyrocketing. And those two countries represent, what, about 2.8 billion people? What is that, 25, 30% of the world's population? And what is happening in China and India today? They are building coal-fired power plants like the world has never seen. Not my numbers, the numbers. International Atomic Energy Agency data for the nuclear reactor build-out, and Global Energy Monitor, an anti-coal NGO, for the coal numbers. Today, in China, there are 204,000 megawatts, 204 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity under construction, not being talked about, not permitted, not in blueprint stage, being built today. 204 gigawatts, what is that? What is a comparison there? The entire coal fleet in the United States is 194 gigawatts. Just the addition of the coal-fired capacity under construction in China today is greater than the entire coal fleet in the US. And when they finish building out this 204 gigawatts, 204,000 megawatts, China will have roughly 1.4 terawatts of installed coal-fired capacity. Within about 2 years, China's entire coal-fired capacity will be larger than the entire installed base of electricity generation in the United States of all kinds, coal, hydro, natural gas, nuclear, etc. These numbers are just staggering. And it doesn't fit the narrative, does it? It doesn't fit the narrative about this idea of the energy transition. Because what is happening in China and India is the story. I love you Australians, I do. But you're deluding yourselves if you think you are going to change the trajectory of what is happening in China and India. And unless or until this trajectory changes, there won't be a change in the trajectory of global CO2 emissions. The story is not about the West anymore. It is about the developing world, and in particular, the roughly 2.8 billion people who live in China and India, where the amount of coal-fired capacity under construction today is more than 5 times larger than the amount of nuclear capacity under construction. This is a new graphic. I haven't published this. I've only shown it, I showed it in Perth, Brisbane, Melbourne, and now here. Only the 4th audience to see this. This is a screen grab from the International Energy Agency's latest data on energy investment globally. So I took a screen grab of this graphic, and you see this line here, I added this line. So that line is showing a sum there of about $70 billion. This is China, this is India. This year, China and India, the investment they are making in coal this year alone is roughly equal to the entire investment globally in gas-fired generation. I mean, to use a Britishism, I can do that in Australia, can't I? Britishisms are okay here, right? It's gobsmacking. Absolutely gobsmacking. The amount of investment that is going into coal-fired generation in China and India, particularly when you compare it to gas-fired generation. Now, the U.S., there's a lot of gas-fired generation going in the United States. I can't see this very well. Which color is the U.S.? Yeah, it's the gray. There's a lot of gas-fired generation being built in Texas, and particularly in Texas in general, and in the U.S. in general, because of the boom in AI, et cetera. But this is an amazing chart, just an amazing one to me, and I've looked at it a bunch of times. And I still look at it and I think, holy cow. All right, moving on. So what about Australia? One of the, Scott and I've been talking since February about, and Scott's been, so what are you going to tell, what's your message? And I'm going to be, and I thought about it, and I thought I'm going to be a little impolite, and the message is, what's wrong with you people? I mean, truly, what is wrong with your political class that they don't understand what is going on? They don't understand the context of Australia in the global sense. You Australians, like we Americans, are incredibly lucky. You use about 3 times more more energy overall, this is in gigajoules per capita, than the world average. You're among the lucky ones. And because you're energy rich, my little psychological analysis, you're energy rich, you can afford to monkey around with this because you don't understand it. You've gotten so fat and happy, and I don't say that as it does sound kind of nasty, doesn't it? You've gotten so comfortable that you can afford to tinker around with this. And we're in somewhat the same situation in the United States. But you are among the energy rich. You're among the incredibly fortunate people, the roughly 1 billion, maybe 2 billion in the world today, who live energy rich lives. And now yet, despite this, you are among 32 countries who have declared a legally binding target for net zero. It's not just a suggestion, as we talked about last night in Melbourne, and some of the IPA staffer, Saxon, was talking about this, that you have legislation that was passed in 2022 that requires you, not a suggestion, requires you to hit this net zero target by 2050. But of course, none of these countries are going to achieve it. And I really don't think Ukraine will. Ukraine's on the list. I seriously doubt that Vladimir Putin wakes up every day and says, gee, how are we doing on net zero today? Or the Nigerians. I don't know why the Nigerians are on this list, but nevertheless. Again, emissions. Let's go back. I'm going to pound you with this emissions thing because, again, look at the U.S. Here, since 2000, the U.S. percentage of CO2 emissions have gone from 24% to 13%. China plus India have gone from 13% to 40%. And look at you Australians down there. Aren't you cute? You're proud of your 1.1%, aren't you? You're just going to change the world. All 27 million of you. Congratulations for your cheek, I think is the right word. Oh, we're going to change the world. Do tell. Coal-fired generation. You're shuttering your coal plants. The plan is to shut 90% of them by 2035 and all of them by 2038. In Western Australia, I think by 2029. And by the way, when maybe we had this little panel discussion with Mia and Adam and Chris, there was an article today in the ABC about the disaster of unfolding in Western Australia because one natural gas plant might close. One gas plant might close and the grid might fail because you're closing your coal plants, and now the entire stability of the Western Australia grid is dependent on a single gas plant. But meanwhile, you have this idea, oh, well, we'll shutter our coal-fired generation. China and India are burning more coal in a week than you burn in a year. Hello? Again, sorry, what's wrong with you? What is wrong with your political class? Are they completely scientifically illiterate and innumerate? I should have asked that question first. Listen to you all. Yeah, they are. And another thing. Okay, what about the cost? This is the issue that I think if you're going to win, if you're liberals, you're conservatives, and the nationals are going to prevail on this, you got to hammer the cost issue. There's no such thing as cheap green energy. This is Bjorn Lomborg's chart. He did a very keen analysis, and he published this just a few months ago, used International Energy Agency data, and showed the clear correlation. The more wind and solar, the higher the price. Okay, so here's Lomborg, and you can read, I won't read to you what he said there. So let's look, now he's done all the international analysis. Here's California. Numbers that I pulled, this is my chart, pulled it from Energy Information Administration data, part of the Department of Energy in the United States. Since 2008, which is an important date, by the way, I'll come back to, when Governor Schwarzenegger mandated renewables in California, wind and solar have gone from 3% to 25%, and what's happened over that time period? Residential rates in California have gone up at a rate 3.5 times faster than the rest of the US. It's incredible, isn't it? Now, oh, well, is this just a coincidence? I don't think so. And in fact, California, in some parts of California today, peak rates are $1 a kilowatt hour, and they're going higher. Okay, so we've looked at Lomborg's numbers from IEA. We've looked at California. Here's the UK. A very good analysis done by Catherine Porter with WattLogic. If you don't follow her online, you should. She's fantastic. In fact, I think you should employ her here. Look at what's going on in Australia. She's just a brilliant analyst. But she published this chart, and I doctored it up a little bit to make it just the graphics pop a little bit. And she calculates decarbonization efforts in Britain have cost Brits $297 billion since 2006. And pay attention to that. This is her wording here. She says this graphic shows that the rise in residential prices is not due to increased natural gas prices. In fact, she's showing just exactly that it is unrelated. There is no correlation. And that the increased costs are due to policy costs, including subsidies, and network costs. In other words, dealing with the changes in the transmission grid that have to be upgraded to accommodate all this weather-dependent generation. And I think it was Adam's point. And by the way, Chris's presentation was great. Chris, I mean, that was, we humans are creatures of fire. And I thought that was a great summation. Reminded me of another friend of mine. He said, no, we're not Homo sapiens or Homo faber. We're men, the fire makers. But I think it was Adam that pointed out, oh, I forgot the point that I was going to make. It was a really good one. Yeah, never mind. I'm still referring to you all laughing about your policymakers here. Okay, I'll come back to it. So what's happened here in Australia? The same thing that Lomborg showed with IEA, the same thing that we saw with the UK with Catherine Porter, California, and now here's Australia. Since 2008, when the RET went from 9.5 terawatt hours per year to 45, oh gee, look what's happened. Solar and wind go from 0 to 33%, and the cost of the NEM wholesale price goes up more than 2x. This ain't no coinky-dink, as we say in Oklahoma. There is causation here that we can see very clearly about what happens when you make your system more dependent on the weather. That was what I was going to say. Adam made this point about weather-dependent generation. Okay, so what's my attitude about climate change? What do I think? Well, yes, it may be an issue that we have to deal with, but it's the height of foolishness or the depth of foolishness to make our most important energy network, if we're facing more extreme weather, hotter, colder, more extreme of one kind or longer extremes, it's the height of foolishness to make our most important energy network dependent on the weather. I'm not an engineer, and I figured that all by myself. It truly is stunning. This idea that we're facing more extreme weather because of climate change, and we're just going to make our electric grid dependent on the weather. What genius came up with this? Oh, Harvard Hargrave says, Chris Bowen. You want the mic here, Scott? Yeah, come on back up. Net zero is a budget buster. Amateurs borrow, professionals steal. I borrowed this. No, I stole this from Adam and his very good report on federal spending on climate. This report just came out last month, wasn't it? But the base graphic, this line here, I stole from his chart, adopted it for my own. And what did Adam's numbers show? That since Albanese takes office in 2008, the spending, federal spending, has gone up over 400%, and that you're now spending as much on these climate issues as you are on your Air Force. We flew from San Francisco to Melbourne. It was 17 hours. You got surrounded by a lot of water. You need an Air Force. You need a big one. And yet you're spending as much on this climate silliness as you are on your Air Force. Again, what's wrong with you? What is wrong with your policymakers? Where are their priorities? They're clearly misplaced. Okay, so let's talk about land use. I've been tracking this for a long time, more than 15 years. These are headlines that I've clipped. I won't read them all to you, but Madison County, Iowa, this is the Rosamond Bridge in Madison County, Iowa. In about 2020, the Board of Supervisors in Madison County was thrown overboard. They elected a new anti-wind Board of Supervisors. They implemented a new ordinance that effectively prohibited the construction of new wind projects in the county. Never written about in the New York Times, never written about in the Washington Post, et cetera. They got sued by Mid-American Energy, a subsidiary of a company called Berkshire Hathaway, headed by some bloke named Warren Buffett, who in 2014 said the only reason to build wind turbines is to get the tax credits. So Mid-American sued Madison County in an effort to intimidate the county, to force it to take a wind project they didn't want. It was a PR disaster of the first order. They later withdrew the lawsuit, and the Madison County residents said, how awesome. That's a headline from an article I wrote in Forbes. Cherokee County, Kansas, Reno County, Kansas, San Bernardino County, California, the largest county by area in America, over 2,000 square miles. You cannot build large-scale wind or solar in San Bernardino County, California. A state that, by the way, has a 100% clean electricity mandate by 2045. Norway, Gage County, Nebraska, the Golan Heights in Israel. About 2.5 years ago, an Israeli company called Energix started to build a wind project in the Golan. If you know your geography, this is the area in Israel that abuts Syria. The Druze Arabs have lived in the Golan Heights for centuries. When they started to build this wind project, the Druze rioted for 2 days. Dozens of people went to the hospital. When the rioting stopped, the Israeli police went to Netanyahu and said, you want to build this wind project? You're on your own. Wind project hasn't been built, won't be built. The Israelis have other issues at hand. The Moonlight Range wind farm was just rejected by the Queensland government, and bully for them. Bully for them. These are the wind energy rejections. All of them are tabulated in the Renewable Rejection Database that I started collecting this data about 15 years ago. All of them with dates, with locations, with links to the press clippings or the governmental rejections or restrictions. So why did I start this database? Because in the words of the great late industrial analyst W. Edwards Deming, "In God we trust, all others bring data." These are the data. These are the numbers, not my numbers, the numbers. All of them entered by hand, all of them fully cited. A little bit of privilege since I have the microphone and the clicker here. I'm from Oklahoma. Proudly so. I have deep roots in Oklahoma on my mother's side and my father's side. The Osage tribe in Oklahoma has been involved in the longest running legal battle over wind energy in American history, and they are kicking Enel's butt. Enel is an Italian company, a Rome-based company. Came into Osage County about 2010, started leasing up land in 2011. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, an arm of the Department of Interior, sent a letter to Enel and said, you want to build a wind project in Osage County, you have to get a permit from the Osage tribe. Why? Because the tribe owns all of the subsurface. They own all the minerals, all the oil and gas, all of the rocks. And if you know your history and you've read David Grann's excellent book, Killers of the Flower Moon, you'll know that there was a systematic effort during the 1920s by white folks coming into Osage County, murdering Osage tribal members for their head rights. Because the Osage Indians at that time were among the wealthiest people in the world. Because the wells in Osage County, the oil wells, were so prolific. What happened in 2011, 2014 is not an exact replay of the Killers of the Flower Moon, but it rhymes. In 2014, Enel started to build this wind project. The Bureau of Indian Affairs sent them another letter saying, cease and desist. You have to get a permit from the tribe because you're going to be excavating in their mineral estate. Under the Osage Allotment Act of 1906, Chief James Bigheart, who's one of the most revered of the Osage tribal members, negotiated a treaty that assured the Osage tribe owned in common all of the subsurface. So when Enel started mining the rocks, the tribe went to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and said, hey, they're mining our rocks. They don't have a permit. Rather than stop, Enel sped up the work, put up lights and started working at night. This case has been ongoing since 2011. In 2023, the judge in Tulsa, Jennifer Jo Graves, an Obama appointee, sided with the tribe, ordered the ejectment, that is the removal of all 84 wind turbines. In December of last year, she ordered all of those wind turbines taken down by December 1st of this year. An unprecedented ruling. The biggest black eye in the history of the wind business in American history. The biggest victory in terms of Native American sovereignty in modern American history. Those turbines haven't started coming down yet because Enel has appealed the case to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Denver. I think they're going to lose. And when they start taking those wind turbines down, I'm going to be there in Fairfax, Oklahoma, and in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, with my brothers and my sisters, and my cousin, Nora Rapp, cheering and whooping and hollering at what has happened. And why is it personal to me? My great uncle Ernie Rapp was a member of the Osage tribe. He was born in 1909 in Fairfax, Oklahoma. He had a front row seat to the Reign of Terror. He never told us about it, never talked about it. He was a very dignified man, always dressed impeccably. He was married to my Aunt Genevieve, my grandmother's sister. My cousin Nora owns an Osage headright. I'm a member of the Cherokee tribe. This case is incredibly important. It's incredibly important to the state of Oklahoma, and a massive win is looming for the Osage tribe. And so, as I said, when they start taking those turbines down, I'm going to be over there. I'm going to be so happy with my Osage friends. I'll give you a quote from Chief Jeffrey Standing Bear, who happened to be in high school with my brother Wally. And I interviewed Jeff about this many years ago now. And he was, still stinking mad. I mean, the Osage are just absolutely all united in their hatred of Enel and what they've done, and their attitude, their dismissive attitude toward the tribe. And he told me, he said, well, yeah, they did this, but at least this time those Italians didn't bring smallpox. Yeah, I know. It's a great line. These are the solar rejections, at least 332 of them, all of them in the Renewable Rejection Database. These are the global numbers of wind and solar since 2023. Note in particular the rejections in the UK, Scotland, and Ireland since the 1st of January, at least 26. I think that number is now actually 28. This is the work that Mia Schlicht and her colleagues here at IPA have been doing on the opposition to renewable projects here in Australia. Mia's using a slightly different methodology than I am. She's counting the opposition, not just the rejections or restrictions. And the numbers are significantly lower here. Why? We have counties in the US. We have 3,600 counties. So there are more levels of government that can reject or restrict wind or solar projects than there are here in Australia. But the work that she is doing there is pioneering. It can be a signature project for the IPA, and I think it's incredibly important work, and I'm really thrilled that they stole my idea and are using it. because it's an idea worth stealing, and to show how your farmers, your graziers, as you call them, we call them ranchers, they're opposed to all of this. And if you don't believe it, here's photographic evidence. This is a photo that I stole from Joanne Nova and her blog just a few days ago. And then note the quote there from the AMO about the opposition to high voltage transmission. And I think this is just a masterpiece of bureaucratese. We have not included community sentiment research results in these early conceptual options. Gee, I wonder why not? Because rural folks here in Australia, all around the world, all of them, everywhere, everyone everywhere cares about what happens in their neighborhoods. And it includes wind, solar, batteries, high voltage transmission. They're not NIMBYs. I don't like that term. It's a derogatory term. Everyone everywhere cares about their neighborhoods, and damn well they should. Okay, so back to Australia. You're a coal superpower, but you don't want to burn coal. Go figure. You have the fourth largest reserves, you're the second largest exporter, and you're closing your coal plants. Here's your coal production versus domestic use. You're exporting 7 times more coal than you consume, and yet you're closing your coal plants. Hello? How does this make any sense? Oh, we'll sell it to Japan, we'll sell it to Taiwan, we'll sell it to the South Koreans, we'll sell it to the Chinese. Let them burn that dirty stuff. We don't want to do it ourselves. You need this fuel for grid stability. You need it for affordability. And you're cutting your own throat effectively by not using your domestic resource. Adam and I've laughed about this a couple of times. He said, so I'm paraphrasing the question he put to me, but is there any country that's worse than Australia? And I said, well, I don't know. And then we qualified it. We said, any country that is worse, that has more natural resources than Australia. And I said, the answer is a flat out no. You win, there's some prize for this. I don't know what it is. It's going to be an expensive one. You're a gas superpower. You're the world's 3rd largest LNG exporter. You export 3 times more gas than you consume, and you won't drill for it. What do I know? I'm from Oklahoma. Tulsa's my hometown. Used to be known as the oil capital of the world. It's not any longer. What do I know from growing up hunting and quail in the oil fields? That stuff doesn't come out of the ground by itself. You have to drill for it. And yet your provincial governments are preventing drilling for gas, even though you have gas. Interesting things happening in the Northern Territories, by the way, with Tamboran Resources, with the Beetaloo field. You're a uranium superpower. You have nearly 1/3 of the world's uranium, and you won't build reactors. I'm going on. So what's the way forward? Natural gas to nuclear. This is what I've been talking about for more than 15 years. If you're serious, even if you're not serious about decarbonization, yes, keep your coal plants open, but the world's resource of natural gas is not just large, it's super abundant. It's super abundant all over the planet. Why natural gas? It's relatively cheap. Again, super abundant, low political risk, and then nuclear, hello, you don't have to care about climate to be pro-nuclear. I'm pro-nuclear for a lot of reasons. One is I'm anti-wind. I don't like those. In fact, I hate the wind business. I love birds. I love bats. I see landscapes destroyed because of these monster contraptions. I'm for nuclear because of power density. 2,000 times less land than wind. 200 times less than solar. Why nuclear? Because it makes sense. This is so obvious, Ray Charles could see it. Let's get serious. Creighton's over there saying, you use that in Perth. He's like, you're using the same line. What's the line? Don't change the joke, change the audience. That's what we're doing, yeah. So pull the plug, sober up. You need the leadership of the IPA. You need the liberals, you need the nationals to get their acts together, to figure out the political strategy here to turn this around. You need to keep your coal plants open. You have to focus on affordability and reliability. If your electricity isn't reliable, it's not affordable. You're an energy superpower. Start acting like it. Here's the commercial part of the program. This is my docuseries that came out in January of last year. It's been seen over 3 million times on YouTube. A 5-part docuseries, about 20 minutes each. The 3rd episode largely focuses on the Osage tribe, which I told you is a story that is near and dear to my heart. These are my books. I've written 6 of them. That's right, 6. Here it is. My wife Lauren is here. We've been married 39 years, by the way, as of a week ago Saturday. Stand up. No, it's okay. There she is. Give her a hand. She's a very lucky woman. We're lucky together. We have 3 kids. I've written 6 books. This is the latest one, A Question of Power, Electricity, and the Wealth of Nations. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors. You don't have to read it. You just have to buy it. And if you buy it on your Kindle, I make a better royalty. I'm on Substack. I've written for a lot of newspapers in my career. I've been a reporter my whole career. I write on Substack almost exclusively now because I can write what I want, how I want, when I want, with the charts I want. And I published a piece just a couple of days ago on what's happening here in Australia with many of the charts that you saw tonight. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on TikTok. I'm on TikTok. I don't know. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, what did InstaFace or something? I don't know, all that stuff. I'm going to leave you with this. I see a lot of upside here in Australia. The Liberals got their butts handed to them in the last election. But what in the meetings that we've had here and the interactions I've had with policymakers here, I see a way forward for Australia in terms of throwing off this net zero insanity. And it's one that has to be done. It has to be done if Australia is going to return to a leadership role and return its manufacturing base. It's absolutely essential. So I hope that some of this resonates. I hope that it is maybe a call to arms. I think the IPA is clearly going to be in a leadership role in this with regard to intellectual heft that it brings to this. But it's not going to be quick. It's not going to be cheap. And it won't be easy. But I'm confident it can be done. Thank you kindly.